He returned to the small town of his past, only to settle a matter of forgotten inheritance. But upon seeing the great love of his childhood again, something inside him began to fall apart. She, the woman who loved him in silence, never gave her body to anyone else. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. The black Mercedes cut through the morning fog of the coastal road like a sharp blade tearing silk. Ethan Bennett kept his fingers firm on the steering wheel, but his breathing betrayed the anxiety he was trying to hide. 18 years. 18. Long years since he had set foot in this forgotten piece of the Florida coast, where time seemed to have chosen to stop and wounds never completely healed. The letter was folded on the passenger seat, yellowed by the weeks it had spent on his mahogany desk in his New York office. Trembling handwriting, paper of dubious quality, simple words asking for his presence to resolve the sale of jointly inherited land, bureaucratic issues that could have been resolved by lawyers, powers of attorney, phone calls. But there was a signature at the end that made his world collapse. Isabella Fox. Isabella. The name echoed in his mind like a dangerous mantra, unearthing memories he had buried beneath layers of business success and empty relationships. She had been his first love, the only real love he had known before discovering that money could buy company, but never true intimacy. At 13, she was the girl in white dresses who waited for him at the town square gazebo, always with a sketchbook in her lap, speaking more with delicate gestures than with words. Ethan's father, Benjamin Bennett, had built an empire on morally questionable foundations. A ruthless businessman, he saw people as pieces on a chessboard, moved according to his convenience. One night, without explanations or goodbyes, he removed his teenage son from the coastal town and sent him to a boarding school in Geneva. "You need to be forged in the fire of the real world," was all he said. The silence that followed lasted almost 2 decades. Now at 32, Ethan commanded a multi-million-dollar conglomerate of hotels and resorts scattered throughout the country. He had apartments in 3 major cities, a penthouse in Miami, and a social agenda that rivaled celebrities. Stunning women gravitated around him like satellites, attracted by the magnetism of power and wealth. But none had ever managed to touch the part of him that remained frozen in time, stuck at 14, when his first love was brutally interrupted. The town appeared on the horizon like a faded mirage. The colonial houses were still lined up along the shore, their facades peeling from the sea salt and relentless time. The municipal market maintained the same cast-iron architecture, now rusty and melancholic. The palm trees that lined the main avenue had grown, but seemed more curved, like tired old men who had watched many generations pass without ever truly participating in life. Ethan parked the car in front of the old hotel where he used to have ice cream with Isabella on summer afternoons. The establishment now displayed a faded, closed for renovations sign that seemed to have been there for years. Nostalgia hit him like a punch to the stomach. Every corner, every peeling wall, every century-old tree carried fragments of a youth he had been forced to abandon. He walked through the narrow streets, observing the subtle changes that time had imposed. New commercial establishments tried to attract sporadic tourists, but the town maintained an air of elegant decay, like an elderly lady who refuses to admit that her glory days are in the past. The older residents observed him with poorly disguised curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, trying to connect the elegant and imposing man to the boy who had disappeared from town from one hour to the next. The Fox House was at the end of Maple Street, a 2-story colonial building that had always been imposing, even when the family didn't have the resources to maintain it properly. Ethan approached slowly, like someone walking toward an altar where an inevitable sacrifice awaits. The iron gate was ajar, creaking softly with the sea breeze. The garden, once well tended by Isabella's mother, now displayed a wild charm of controlled abandonment. It was then that he saw her. Isabella was on the porch, bent over a drawing board, completely absorbed in her work. Her light brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, longer than he remembered. She wore a simple blue cotton dress that highlighted the delicate paleness of her skin. She was 30 now, but there was a timeless quality about her, as If the years had passed by her without really touching her. Ethan remained motionless at the gate, drinking in the sight of her like a thirsty man in the desert. She hadn't noticed his presence yet, and he took advantage of these precious moments to reconnect with the woman the girl of his dreams had become. There was a new melancholy in her posture, a maturity that spoke of experiences lived in silence. But there was also something familiar, comforting, as if an essential part of her had remained untouched by time. When she finally raised her eyes and saw him, the pencil slipped from her fingers and rolled across the porch floor. For an instant that seemed eternal. They looked at each other across the years of separation, trying to decipher in their adult faces the echoes of the children they once were. Isabella rose slowly, and Ethan noticed how she still had the habit of slightly hunching her shoulders, as if asking the world for permission to exist. "Ethan," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered, soft, musical, carrying a shyness that wasn't weakness, but a form of protection. "You came." "I came," replied Ethan, pushing the gate that creaked in protest. Each step toward the porch seemed to carry the weight of 18 years of silence. "I received your letter." Isabella descended the wooden steps with the same contained grace that he remembered, but there was something different about her movements. A new caution, as if each gesture was calculated not to awaken sleeping ghosts. She stopped at a respectful distance, and Ethan noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. "You look different," she murmured, her eyes discreetly scanning. The impeccable Italian suit, the Swiss watch, the leather shoes that cost more than many earned in a month. "Taller, more—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Imposing." Ethan smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. 18 years do that to a person. "You've changed too, Isabella." He didn't mention how she seemed more fragile, as if part of her essence had been lost along the way. "But you still draw." She followed his gaze to the drawing board abandoned on the porch. "Children's illustrations. Books, educational magazines. It pays the bills." Her voice carried a resignation that disturbed him. The Isabella he had known dreamed of studying art in Miami, talked about exhibiting her drawings in galleries, had eyes that sparkled with secret ambitions. "And the house?" he asked, observing the faded curtains, the peeling paint on the windows, the roof that clearly needed repairs. "Do you live here alone?" "Since Mom died, 16 years ago." The information hit him like a slap. He didn't know. During all those years abroad, he had avoided any news about the town, about the people he had left behind. "I rent rooms to tourists occasionally. It helps with expenses." Ethan felt an inexplicable pang of guilt. While he had built his empire, accumulated wealth that he couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes, she struggled to keep a roof over her head, alone in a house too big for one person. "Isabella, No," she interrupted him gently but firmly. "There's nothing to apologize for. Life took different paths for us. It's natural." She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive gesture he recognized from adolescence. "Let's resolve the land issue. That's why you're here." But it wasn't. Ethan knew he could have resolved any legal issue through third parties. He was there because he needed to see with his own eyes what had happened to the only person who had ever managed to touch his soul. He was there because for 18 years he had carried the memory of her like a man carries a faded photograph in his wallet, constantly present but never truly examined. "Can we talk inside?" he suggested, noticing how neighbors were beginning to accumulate at windows, curious about the presence of the black Mercedes and the elegant stranger. Isabella hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course, but I apologize for the state of the house. I didn't imagine you would come personally." The interior of the house was a museum of frozen memories. The furniture was the same from his adolescence, covered with white cloths to protect them from dust and time. The walls still displayed the same paintings, seascapes painted by Isabella's grandfather, family portraits in golden frames. The smell was familiar, a mixture of old wood, dried flowers, and something indefinable that he associated with Isabella herself. "Coffee?" she offered, heading to the kitchen with hurried steps. Ethan followed her, observing how she moved through the house with the familiarity of someone who knows every floorboard, every door that creaks, every temperamental switch. The kitchen maintained the rustic charm of decades past. Gas stove with rust stains, small refrigerator that hummed constantly, wooden table marked by use. Isabella prepared the coffee with economical and precise movements, avoiding his gaze. Ethan took the opportunity to study her more carefully. There were fine lines around her eyes that didn't exist before, marks of worry and sleepless nights. Her hands, always delicate, now showed small scars and calluses, evidence of manual work she had never done in her youth. But what intrigued him most was her posture. She moved like someone who had learned to occupy the smallest space possible, not to bother, not to be noticed. About the land, she began, serving the coffee in porcelain cups that had known better days. It's the property on top of the hill, you remember? Our parents bought it together many years ago before... She stopped abruptly. Before my father decided to send me away, Ethan completed, accepting the cup. Their fingers touched briefly during the transfer, and he felt Isabella shudder. Why did you never sell your part? She sat on the other side of the table, maintaining the safe distance between them. Sentimental, I suppose. It was where we used to go when we were children. The view of the sea, the ancient tree where... She stopped again, biting her lower lip in a gesture that awakened dangerous memories in Ethan. The tree where we buried our treasure, he remembered, surprised by the clarity of the recollection. An old can with our important things, shells, letters, a bracelet of yours. Isabella went pale, her hands visibly trembling around the cup. You remember that? I remember everything, Isabella. His voice came out more intense than he intended. Every afternoon we spent together, every conversation, every dream we shared. I remember the last day when you said you loved me and I didn't have the courage to respond because I thought we had all the time in the world. Tears welled up in her eyes but were quickly contained. We shouldn't talk about this. The past should stay in the past. Why? Ethan leaned forward, studying her face. Why did you never marry, Isabella? Why do you still live alone in this house, living as if time had stopped? The question hit her like a slap. She rose abruptly, turning to the window that overlooked the backyard. Some people are made for solitude. There's nothing wrong with that. You weren't made for solitude, he stated, rising as well. You were made to be loved, to create, to fly. What happened to your dreams, to your plans to study art? Isabella remained with her back to him, her shoulders tense. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. Dreams are luxuries that not everyone can afford to cultivate, Ethan. You should know that better than anyone. Isabella's phrase echoed in the silence of the kitchen like a veiled accusation. Ethan approached slowly, stopping a few inches from her back. He could feel the heat emanating from her skin, the subtle perfume she still wore, a mixture of jasmine and something indefinable that was purely hers. What do you mean by that? He asked, his voice low and controlled. Isabella turned slowly, and he saw that her defenses were crumbling. There was pain in her eyes, a deep hurt that she had learned to carry alone. You really don't know why you were sent away? Ethan frowned. For 18 years he had accepted his father's version, that he needed to be educated abroad, prepared to take over the family business. He had never questioned, never investigated. Perhaps because deep down he knew that the truth would be more painful than ignorance. My father said it was necessary for my education, my future. He hesitated, seeing Isabella's expression change. Was there another reason? She laughed, but it was a sound without joy, laden with bitterness. Your father was very good at creating convenient versions of the truth. She moved past him, returning to the living room, and Ethan followed her like a hypnotized man. In the living room, Isabella stopped in front of a dusty bookshelf and removed a thick volume, an old photo album. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, looking for something specific. Finally, she found what she was looking for and extended the album to him. The photograph showed a party in the town square, the traditional 4th of July celebration that happened every year. Ethan immediately recognized himself, at 13, smiling next to Isabella. But there was something else in the image that disturbed him. In the background, half hidden among the shadows of the trees, was his father, Benjamin, observing them with an expression that Ethan had never noticed before. There was something predatory in that look, something that made his stomach turn. "He was always watching," Isabella murmured, her voice laden with an old sadness. "At first, we thought it was normal paternal protection, but later—" She stopped, closing the album forcefully. "Later what, Isabella?" Ethan felt an icy sensation rising up his spine. "What did my father do?" She moved away from him, hugging her own body as if trying to protect herself from painful memories. "He started showing up here more frequently, said he wanted to help. My mother with finances, that he had a business proposal for our family. Mum was sick, you remember. We needed money for medicine." Ethan vaguely remembered. Isabella's mother had always been fragile, but in the last summer they spent together, she seemed even more debilitated, spending entire days in bed, coughing incessantly. "He would come in the afternoon when you were at summer school," Isabella continued, avoiding his gaze. "He brought presents for me, dresses, art books, drawing materials, said I had talent, that I deserved beautiful things. I was just a child, Ethan. I didn't understand the intentions behind the kindness." The revelation hit him like a hammer. Ethan felt his legs falter and leaned against the nearest wall. His father, the man he had always admired for his strength and determination, despite his questionable methods, had harassed Isabella when she was just a vulnerable girl. He didn't. Ethan couldn't finish the question. Isabella shook her head, but there was something in her expression that suggested the story wasn't that simple. "Not in the way you're thinking. But there were situations, moments when he took advantage of my naivety, of the vulnerability of our situation. Inappropriate touches disguised as paternal affection. Comments about my body that made me feel ashamed and confused." Ethan clenched his fists, anger burning in his veins like acid. Everything began to make sense. The sudden departure, the prohibition of maintaining contact, the years of forced silence. His father hadn't sent him away to protect his education, but to cover up his own crimes. "Why did you never tell anyone?" he asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "Who would I tell?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "Your father was the most powerful man in town. Who would believe the daughter of a sick and poor woman against the word of Benjamin Bennett? Besides, he was too smart to leave evidence. There was always a plausible explanation for his presence, always an excuse for the gifts, for the touches." Ethan approached her again, but stopped when he saw that she instinctively recoiled. The reaction destroyed him inside. "Isabella, I'm so sorry. If I had known—" "You were a child too," she interrupted him gently. "There was nothing you could have done, and maybe it was better that way. Maybe your father spared you from something worse by sending you away." "Worse how?" The question came out before he could contain himself. Isabella closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, Ethan saw in them an abyss of pain that made him want to embrace her and protect her from all the demons of the world. "There was a night shortly before you left. Mom was very sick, almost unconscious with fever. Your father showed up here saying he had a new medicine, very expensive, that could save her." She paused, breathing deeply as if gathering courage to continue. "He said he would do anything to help our family, but that gestures of kindness deserved gratitude. I was 14, Ethan. I was a scared child desperate to save my mother. When he started touching me differently, more invasively, I didn't know how to react. The room seemed to have gotten smaller, the air thicker. Ethan felt as if he was suffocating. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said quickly, perhaps sensing the desperation in his voice. "I mean, not what he wanted. I managed to escape, locked. Myself in my mother's room. He left, but the next day you had disappeared. No explanations, no goodbyes, simply vanished." Ethan then understood the magnitude of his father's manipulation. Benjamin had orchestrated everything perfectly, removing the only person who could interfere with his plans, isolating Isabella even more. "And your mother?" "Died 3 months later. Isabella's voice was almost inaudible. She never got the miraculous medicine your father promised. I think he never had any intention of really helping her. It was just another way to manipulate me. The silence that followed was laden with pain and regret. Ethan wanted to say something, anything that could diminish the suffering she had carried alone for so long, but the words seemed inadequate in the face of the magnitude of the betrayal. "That's why you never left here," he said finally, more a statement than a question. "That's why you never married, never had a serious relationship. He destroyed your ability to trust." Isabella nodded slowly. For years, any male approach made me remember that night. I felt dirty, marked, as if I carried a defect that everyone could see. She looked at him directly for the first time since the conversation had begun. "You were the only person I could trust completely, and when you disappeared without explanations, I thought maybe you knew what your father had tried to do and judged me responsible." The revelation hit Ethan like a devastating hurricane. For 18 years he had carried the guilt of leaving, without explanations, imagining that Isabella considered him a coward, a spoiled boy who had chosen European comfort over adolescent love. He never imagined that she had interpreted his silence as judgment, as if he considered her guilty for his father's predatory behavior. "God, Isabella," he murmured, his voice broken with emotion. "Never, not for a second, did I think you were responsible for anything. I didn't know any of this. If I had known." He stopped, realizing that his words sounded empty in the face of so much suffering. She observed him with eyes that had learned to distrust promises and beautiful declarations. "What would you have done? You were just a boy, just as I was just a girl. We were at the mercy of adults and their dark ambitions." Ethan approached her carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. May I touch you?" The question came out as a vulnerable whisper, and something in Isabella's chest warmed at the gentleness of the request. She nodded slowly, and he extended his hand to caress her face. The touch was soft, reverent, as if she were made of precious porcelain that could break with any sudden movement. Isabella closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his palm against her skin for the first time in 18 years. "You're not dirty," he said firmly. "You're not marked. You're the purest and most courageous person I know. To survive all this alone, to maintain your dignity, to protect your memories, that requires a strength I don't even know if I possess." Tears streamed down Isabella's cheeks, but this time she didn't try to contain them. It was as if an emotional dam had broken after years of damming up pain and loneliness. Ethan pulled her into a careful embrace, and she allowed herself to rest her face against his chest, listening to the accelerated rhythm of his heart. They stayed like this for long minutes, reconnecting through silence and physical proximity. Ethan felt the delicate perfume of her hair, the fragility of her shoulders, the subtle tremor that ran through her body like waves of relief and fear mixed together. "Is there anything else I need to know?" he asked softly, kissing the top of her head. Isabella moved away slightly, looking at him with an expression that mixed love and terror. "There are things I've never told anyone, secrets I've buried so deeply that sometimes I forget they're real." "You can tell me anything," Ethan assured, holding her hands between his. "After everything we've been through, there's nothing that could drive me away from you." Isabella breathed deeply, gathering courage. "After you left, I discovered something that changed everything for me." She paused, studying his expression. "I was pregnant, Ethan." The world seemed to stop. Ethan felt as if he had been punched in the stomach, all the breath leaving his lungs at once. "Pregnant? But how? We never—" He stopped, the realization hitting him like lightning. "Was it mine?" "Yes," she whispered. "That last afternoon, on the Hill property. You remember? We went further than we had planned. It was the first time for both of us, sweet and awkward, full of love and promises for the future." Ethan remembered perfectly. It had been 2 days before his forced departure, a golden summer afternoon when they finally yielded to the attraction that had been growing between them for months. They had made love under the shade of the centennial tree, swearing eternal love and making plans to run away together when they were older. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked, his voice choked. "How could I?" Isabella laughed bitterly. You had vanished without a trace. No address, phone, nothing. And I was a 14-year-old girl, pregnant, alone with a dying mother and a dangerous man prowling our house. The magnitude of the suffering she had faced alone crushed him. While he studied in elite European schools, worrying only about grades and extracurricular activities, she faced a teenage pregnancy in secret, dealing with the psychological pressure of his father and the deterioration of her mother's health. What happened to? He couldn't finish the question. Lost the baby in the 4th month, she answered, with a haunted calm that spoke of pain long processed. It was during one of the winter storms. I was alone at home. Mom had been admitted to the hospital in the neighboring town. I woke up with terrible pains and blood on the bed. I managed to reach the hospital on foot, but it was already too late. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to process the information. They had lost a child he didn't even know existed. Isabella had faced this devastating loss completely alone at 14, without emotional or financial support. After that, she continued in a monotone voice, something in me broke. It wasn't just the loss of the baby, but the confirmation that I was truly alone in the world. You had disappeared, Mom was dying, and I carried all these secrets that I couldn't share with anyone. Isabella. Ethan tried to find words that could diminish his guilt and regret, but there were none. I wrote letters to you, she confessed. Dozens of them. I told about the pregnancy, about the loss, about how I felt lost and haunted. But I never knew where to send them. I ended up burying them under our tree, along with the other memories of our childhood. The mention of the letters awakened a memory in Ethan. During his first years at boarding school, he had frequently dreamed of Isabella, waking with the sensation that she was trying to communicate with him somehow. Now he understood that perhaps there was some truth in that intuition. Are the letters still there? He asked. I believe so. I buried everything in a metal box deep down. I thought maybe one day you would come back and could find them. It was a childish fantasy, I suppose. Ethan rose abruptly, seized by an inexplicable urgency. I want to see those letters. I want to read every word you wrote. I want to know every moment of pain you faced alone. Isabella looked at him with surprise. Now? Now, he confirmed, extending his hand to her. We've already wasted 18 years. I don't want to lose another minute. Hesitantly, she accepted his hand and stood up. The hill is a 20-minute walk. The land has been abandoned for years, full of tall grass and holes. I don't care, Ethan said firmly. I need to go there. I need to connect with what we lost, with what you went through alone. It's the only way to begin healing this wound. Isabella studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. Finally, she nodded. All right. But Ethan... She paused, her eyes filling with tears again. After reading these letters, after knowing everything, you may decide it's better to leave again, and this time I'll understand. He held her face between his hands, forcing her to maintain eye contact. I'm not going to leave, Isabella, not this time. No matter what those letters say, no matter how many secrets still exist between us, I came here to resolve issues from the past, but I discovered that I actually came to rebuild our future. The walk to the hill was made in contemplative silence. Ethan had insisted on using his car, but Isabella asked that they go on foot, as they did in adolescence. She needed time to prepare emotionally for what they were about to unearth, literally and figuratively. The path was wilder than he remembered. The vegetation had grown freely, creating a narrow trail between thorny bushes and trees that leaned over the path like silent guardians. Isabella walked in front, moving with the confidence of someone who had traveled that route countless times. Over the years, I came here every week, she confessed without looking back, especially on anniversaries. The day you left, the day I discovered the pregnancy, the day I lost our baby. It was like visiting a private cemetery of buried dreams. The declaration made Ethan's heart tighten. While he lived his European adventures, dated other women, and built his financial empire, Isabella remained trapped in a loop of pain and nostalgia, ritualistically visiting the ghosts of a lost love. When they finally reached the land, Ethan was shocked by the state of abandonment. The property that their parents had once imagined transforming into a luxury resort was now a wild field, dominated by tall grass and trees twisted by the sea wind. But the centennial tree was still there, majestic and imposing, its deep roots resisting time and abandonment. There, Isabella pointed to the base of the tree where the roots formed a kind of natural alcove. I buried everything deep down to protect from rain and animals. Ethan had brought a small shovel from the trunk of his car. He began to dig with determination, removing layers of moist earth and decomposed leaves. Isabella sat on the grass, beside him, watching him work with an expression of anxiety and anticipation. After almost an hour of excavation, the shovel hit something metallic. Carefully, Ethan removed the rest of the earth, revealing an old cookie tin, rusty but still intact. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Isabella asked softly. "Once opened, we can't go back." "I'm sure," he replied, although his voice betrayed the nervousness he felt. The lid of the box resisted for a moment, but finally yielded with a metallic creak. The contents were surprisingly well preserved, protected by plastics and fabrics that Isabella had used to carefully wrap each item. On top was a thick envelope, with his name written in Isabella's young handwriting. Below it, Ethan recognized some of his own belongings from adolescence: the leather bracelet she had made for him, some stones they had collected on the beach, faded Polaroid photographs of the two together. But there were also things he didn't immediately recognize. A small hand-knitted baby bootie the size of a thumb, a positive pregnancy test carefully wrapped in white fabric, blurry ultrasounds that showed the tiny silhouette of a life that was never born. Ethan held the ultrasound with hands that trembled violently. There was the tangible proof of the child they had created together and lost, a child who would be 19 now if it had survived. "It was a girl," Isabella whispered, watching him examine the image. "The doctor confirmed when it happened. I was going to call her Helena. It was the name we always liked when we played house." The tears that Ethan had managed to contain until that moment finally overflowed. He cried for the child he never knew, for the woman he loved who had faced this loss alone, for the 18 years they had lost because of his father's dark ambitions. Isabella approached and wrapped her arms around his trembling shoulders, offering the comfort he had failed to give her when she needed it most. They stayed like this for long minutes, crying together for the first time for the losses they had carried separately for so long. Finally, Ethan composed himself enough to open the envelope with the letters. There were dozens of them, written over several years, documenting Isabella's emotional journey from the discovery of the pregnancy to the darkest days of her post-loss depression. The first letters were full of hope and excitement. Isabella described pregnancy symptoms, speculated about what it would be like to raise the child together, made plans for when he would return. Her young handwriting overflowed with love and optimism, even in the face of the difficult situation. "Dear Ethan," said one of the first letters, "our baby is growing inside me and I feel as if I'm carrying a piece of you with me always. I know you'll return soon and we'll build the family we always dreamed of." But as the weeks passed without news from him, the tone of the letters gradually changed. Hope gave way to worry, then to despair. Isabella described how she hid the pregnancy from neighbors, how she invented excuses for her absence from classes, how she dealt alone with morning sickness while caring for her sick mother. A particularly touching letter dated from a few days before the loss. "My love, our baby is moving now. At night, when everything is quiet, I put my hand on my belly and imagine that you are here with me, feeling these little kicks too. I dream of the day when you will hold our daughter in your arms and she will immediately know that you are her daddy. Please come back soon. I need you so much." The letters. After the loss were devastating to read. The handwriting became shaky, the words stained by tears. Isabella described the physical and emotional pain, the feeling of emptiness, the guilt for not having been able to protect the child. "I couldn't save her, Ethan," said one of the most painful letters. Our baby is gone and I feel as if a part of me died too. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe I didn't deserve to be a mother. Maybe you sensed this somehow and that's why you chose to stay away." Ethan had to stop reading several times, the weight of guilt and regret threatening to crush him. Isabella had interpreted his silence as intentional abandonment, had carried not only the pain of loss, but also the conviction that she was responsible for her own tragedy. The last letters, written years later, showed a more mature but deeply melancholic Isabella. She had learned to live with the pain but never to completely overcome it. "I think I finally understood," said the last letter, dated just 2 years ago. "You didn't come back because you knew I was broken. That carrying the weight of our history would be too heavy for anyone. I don't blame you for choosing a new life without the shadows of our past. I just wanted you to know that I understand, and that I will always love you for the man I know you've become." When he finished reading, Ethan was completely devastated. He looked at Isabella, who was observing his reaction with eyes full of understanding and forgiveness. "Now you know everything," she said softly. "The whole truth about why I could never move on, why I never allowed myself to love another person. It wasn't just because you left, but because of carrying the weight of this whole story alone." Ethan carefully put the letters back in the box, along with the other precious objects. "Isabella," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "you spent 18 years carrying a guilt that was never yours. My father intentionally separated us, manipulated the circumstances to protect his own dark secrets. You were a victim, not guilty." She smiled sadly. "I know that now, with the adult mind, but the 14-year-old girl in me still carries these wounds." Ethan approached her, taking her hands between his. "Then let's heal those wounds together. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." The days that followed the unearthing of the letters passed in a haze of emotional revelations and reconnections. Ethan had cancelled all his commitments in New York, informing his assistant that he would extend his stay indefinitely. For the first time in years, business took a back seat. He had stayed at the small inn in the center of town, but spent most of his time at Isabella's house, helping her, with long postponed repairs and simply relearning to be in her presence. There was a cautious delicacy between them, as if both were made of fine glass that could shatter with any sudden movement. Isabella gradually allowed him to get closer. First, there were long conversations on the porch, then walks on the beach at sunset, and finally she accepted that he cook for her, a skill he had developed during his years in Europe. Seeing her savor a risotto that he had carefully prepared awakened in him a deep and unexpected satisfaction. "You cook better than I expected," she commented one night, cleaning the last remains of the plate with a piece of bread. "Where did you learn?" "Loneliness teaches many things," Ethan replied, observing how the candlelight danced on her face. "In my first years in Europe, I hated the boarding school food so much that I started preparing my own meals. It became a form of meditation, I suppose." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "I also found consolation in solitary activities. Drawing, gardening, restoring old furniture. Ways to keep my hands busy when the mind became too heavy." It was in these small confessions that Ethan perceived how both had developed similar survival mechanisms, ways of dealing with loneliness and trauma that had shaped them in subtle but profound ways. One afternoon, while they were organizing the dusty attic of the house together, Isabella found a box of her mother's belongings that she hadn't been able to open since her death. With trembling hands, she removed the lid, revealing photographs, letters, and old documents. "Look at this," she murmured, removing a folder of legal documents. "Contracts, agreements. I never knew Mom had negotiated so much with your father." In the last months of her life, Ethan examined the papers with growing unease. There were several loan contracts signed by Isabella's mother, using the house as collateral. The dates corresponded exactly to the period when his father had begun to harass Isabella more intensely. "He was blackmailing you," Ethan realized, anger burning in his voice. "He offered money for your mother's medical treatments in exchange for access to you." Isabella went pale, clutching the edge of the table to keep from staggering. Mom knew. She knew what he wanted, and still— "No," Ethan said firmly, holding her shoulders. "Look at the dates more carefully. The first loans were made when you were still a child, well before any inappropriate behavior began. Your mother— was desperate, sick, needing money to survive. My father gradually took advantage of that vulnerability. Continuing to examine the documents, they discovered something even more disturbing. There was a clause buried in the fine print of the last contract. If the debt was not paid within 6 months, Benjamin Bennett would have the right to expropriate not only the house, but also to assume emergency guardianship of Isabella if her mother died. "Oh my God," Isabella whispered, the understanding hitting her like lightning. He was planning everything. If Mom died, I would become legally dependent on him. The monstrosity of his father's plan left Ethan nauseated. Benjamin had orchestrated a perfect trap, indebting a vulnerable family, positioning himself as a generous benefactor, and creating the legal circumstances to have total control over Isabella when she became an orphan. That's why he sent me. Away so abruptly, Ethan realized. I was becoming an obstacle to his plans. If we stayed together, you would have protection, someone who would question any guardianship attempt. Isabella sat heavily in an old chair, processing the implications. So my virginity, my inability to relate to other men, it wasn't just emotional trauma, it was also self-preservation. Unconsciously, I knew that being with someone would make me vulnerable again. The revelation was both liberating and devastating. Understanding the conscious and unconscious motivations behind her choices helped Isabella make sense of decades of emotional isolation, but also confirmed how his father had managed to deeply damage her ability to trust and surrender. "And now?" she asked, looking at him with eyes that mixed hope and terror. "Now that we know all this, what do we do with this information?" Ethan knelt before her chair, taking her hands between his. "Now, we begin our healing. Together. You spent 18 years carrying these secrets alone, blaming yourself for tragedies you didn't cause, punishing yourself for crimes you never committed. But I'm still the same person," she protested. "I still have the same wounds, the same fears. Knowing the truth doesn't erase what I felt, what I went through." "No," he agreed. "But now you're not alone to face this. And now I understand why. You protect yourself so much, why each touch, each approach is so difficult for you." Isabella looked into his eyes, and for the first time since his return, he saw something beyond pain and caution in her expression. There was a shy glow, a spark of possibility. "Ethan," she began hesitantly, "there's one thing I need to ask you, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Anything." "During all these years you've been with other women, had relationships, lovers, maybe even loved some of them." She paused, gathering courage. "How can I compete with that? How can a 30-year-old woman, virgin, haunted by traumas, be enough for a man who has had access to the entire world?" The question revealed Isabella's deepest insecurity, the fear that had kept her isolated for so long. Ethan understood that his answer was not only crucial for their future, but also for her ability to forgive herself and accept herself. "Isabella," he said, his voice laden with a sincerity that cut like a blade, "for 18 years, I slept with women whose names I forgot before even waking up. I had relationships that lasted months without me feeling any real connection. I built an empire, accumulated wealth, conquered everything I thought I wanted." He paused, studying her face carefully. "But you know what was the one thing I never managed to find in any of those women? The feeling of being home, of being complete, of looking at someone and feeling that I had finally found the person who was missing to make my life meaningful." Isabella felt tears welling up again, but these were different, warmer, less bitter. "You don't need to compete with anyone," Ethan continued, "because there is no competition. You're not an option among many. You're the only option that matters, the only woman who ever managed to touch my soul." He leaned forward, bringing his face closer to hers. "And about your virginity, Isabella, that's not a defect or a limitation. It's a precious gift that you kept, perhaps without consciously knowing for this moment. For us." The distance between them diminished until their breaths mingled. "May I kiss you?" he whispered, and the question carried 18 years of repressed longing. Isabella closed her eyes and nodded almost imperceptibly, but when Ethan's lips approached hers, she instinctively drew back, panic flaring in her chest like wildfire. "I'm sorry," she whispered, bringing her hands to her face in shame. "I want to, I really want to, but my body, it's as if it has a life of its own, as if it's programmed to protect itself." Ethan immediately retreated, respecting her space. "There's nothing to apologize for. 18 years of self-preservation don't disappear in a few days, even when the mind understands that it's safe." He sat on the floor in front of her, maintaining a comfortable distance. "We can go at your pace, Isabella. There's no rush. We have all the time in the world now." "But what if I never can?" The vulnerability in her voice broke his heart. "What if the damage is too permanent? What if you get tired of waiting?" "Then I'll wait forever," he replied without hesitation. "And if we never manage to go beyond conversations and dinners together, it will still be more real intimacy than I've had with anyone else in my adult life." The days that followed established a new rhythm between them. Ethan meticulously respected Isabella's boundaries, but also gently encouraged her to explore her comfort zone. They began with small gestures. He would hold her hand for a few seconds when passing the salt during dinner. She would allow him to arrange a lock of hair that fell over her face. One night, as they watched the sunset on the porch, Isabella surprised herself by resting her head on his shoulder. They felt her tension gradually dissipating as she realized she was safe, that he wouldn't interpret the gesture as an invitation for more than she was ready to offer. "Tell me about your other women," she unexpectedly asked, still with her head resting on his shoulder. Ethan tensed. "I don't think that's a good idea. Please, I need to understand what your life was like away from here. I need to know the man you've become, not just the boy I remembered." He breathed deeply, carefully, choosing his words. "There were many, especially in the first years. It was as if I was trying to fill a void that I didn't understand. The more women I conquered, the lonelier I felt." "Was there any who was special, that you thought about marrying?" "One," he admitted reluctantly. "Gabriella. I met her at 25, in Paris. She was American too, from a wealthy family in Los Angeles. Intelligent, sophisticated, beautiful. We were together for 2 years. Isabella felt a pang of jealousy that surprised her with its intensity. "What happened?" "She wanted everything I thought I should want too. Marriage, children, a brilliant social life. But when she talked about our future, I felt as if I was being strangled. One night she was planning our wedding, choosing flowers and menus, and I realized I was thinking about you." Isabella raised her head to look at him. "About me?" "Not consciously, but I was wondering what it would be like to plan a wedding with someone who really knew me, who had seen me before I became successful, who loved me for who I was and not for what I owned." He gently caressed her hair. "I broke up with Gabriella the following week. She called me crazy, said I was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to me." "And did you think she was right?" "For a while, yes. But now I know I was waiting for you. My heart always knew you existed somewhere, even when my mind was trying to convince itself otherwise." That night, for the first time since his return, Isabella managed to kiss his cheek before saying goodbye. It was a chaste kiss, almost childlike, but it represented a monumental victory over her own fears. The progress continued in small increments. A week later, she held his hand during a walk on the beach. A few days later, she allowed him to hug her when she cried reading one of her mother's old letters that she had found. But it was when they discovered more evidence of Benjamin Bennett's crimes that physical closeness suddenly became necessary for both, a way to console each other in the face of increasingly disturbing revelations. Ethan had begun to discreetly investigate his father's business during that fateful period 18 years ago. He talked with old residents, examined public records, even hired a private investigator from Miami to search police files. What they discovered was even darker than they had imagined. Benjamin had used similar tactics with at least 3 other families in the region, always targeting families with teenage daughters and sick or absent parents. In 2 cases, the families had lost their properties and the girls had simply disappeared from town. One of them was only 13 when she vanished, Ethan reported, his voice trembling with contained anger. The family said she had gone to visit relatives in another state, but no one ever heard from her again. Isabella went pale, understanding that she could easily have been one of those disappeared girls if circumstances had been slightly different. What happened to them? Where are they now? We don't know. The investigator is trying to track them, but almost 20 years have passed. If they're alive, they could be anywhere in the country, with different identities, living completely new lives. The magnitude of Benjamin's crimes was overwhelming. He had not only been an unscrupulous businessman, he had been a systematic predator who had destroyed countless lives to satisfy his perversions. "We need to do something," Isabella said firmly. "We can't let him die taking these secrets to the grave." "My father died 5 years ago," Ethan revealed. "Heart attack. But you're right. We can still seek justice for the victims, try to find these women, offer reparations somehow." It was that night, as they planned how to publicly expose Benjamin's crimes, that Isabella finally allowed Ethan to truly kiss her. It wasn't planned. She simply looked at him, saw the determination in his eyes, to do what was right, even if it tarnished the family name, and felt a wave of love so intense that all her defenses crumbled at once. The kiss was hesitant at first, then deepened when she realized she didn't feel fear, only love and long-repressed desire. When they finally separated, both were trembling. "Isabella," Ethan whispered, his control by a thread. "I know," she responded, perfectly understanding what he couldn't say. "I feel it too. But I'm still not ready for more. I still need time. As much time as you need," he promised, kissing her forehead with reverence. "Just being able to kiss you is more than I dreamed of having again." That night, Isabella slept for the first time in years without nightmares. And Ethan, in his room at the inn, finally understood that he had found his way back home, not the place where he was born, but the person who had always been his true home. But not everything would be so simple. The next day, a phone call would change everything again, forcing them to face not only the past, but also the complexities of the present they had built separately from each other. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning, breaking the tranquility that Ethan and Isabella had carefully built over the past few weeks. Ethan's assistant in New York was desperate. A $200 million hotel acquisition was about to collapse because he wasn't present to finalize the negotiations in person. "I can't resolve this remotely," she explained, her voice tense through the phone line. "The Japanese investors insist on face-to-face meetings. If you're not here by Thursday, they'll withdraw the offer, and 5 years of work will go down the drain." Ethan took the call in Isabella's kitchen, who was preparing morning coffee while pretending not to hear every word. When he hung up, the silence between them was laden with unspoken tensions. "You need to go," she said finally, not looking at him. "Not necessarily. I can find a way to postpone or send another executive to represent." "Ethan." Isabella turned to face him, and he saw that she had raised her defenses again, as if preparing for another abandonment. "You have a life in New York, responsibilities, commitments, an empire that can't be managed from a distance indefinitely." "And you?" he asked, approaching her. "What do you have here besides ghosts and loneliness?" The question came out harsher than he intended, and Isabella recoiled as if she had been slapped. "This is my home, Ethan. It's all I know, all I have. Come with me." The words came out of his mouth before he could properly think them through, but as soon as he said them, he realized they were exactly what he wanted to say. "Come to New York. Sell this house, start a new life, start our new life." Isabella went pale, clutching the edge of the sink for support. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to trust me enough to take a leap in the dark, to believe that we can build something together away from here, away from all these painful memories." "And if it doesn't work out?" Her voice was almost a whisper. "And if I can't adapt to your life? And if I'm just a burden, A pathetic reminder of a past you should have overcome a long time ago. Ethan held her face between his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Then we'll come back here. We'll sell everything in New York and build a life in this town, but at least we'll try, Isabella. At least we'll give ourselves a chance. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. You don't understand. I've never left this town for more than a few hours. I've never flown in a plane, never stayed in a hotel, never eaten in a fancy restaurant. Your life is a world I don't know. Then I'll teach you. We'll be together. We'll learn together. He kissed her forehead gently. Isabella, you're the most intelligent and resilient woman I know. You survived things that would break most people. Learning to navigate a big city will be easy compared to what you've already faced. But she still hesitated, and Ethan could see fear battling with desire in her eyes. What if people realize I don't belong in that world? What if I embarrass you? Embarrass me? Ethan laughed, but it was a gentle sound, full of admiration. Isabella, you would make me the proudest man in New York just by being at my side. Anyone who couldn't see your natural class, your intelligence, your beauty, would be someone whose opinion is worth nothing. The rain increased in intensity, hitting against the kitchen windows like small stones. Isabella looked through the window at the garden she had tended alone for so many years, at the porch where she had drawn thousands of illustrations, at the backyard where she had buried her dreams along with the never-sent letters. I need time to think, she said finally. Time is what we don't have much of, Ethan replied, checking his watch. I need to be in New York tomorrow night to prepare for Thursday's meetings. If you come with me, we'll have to leave today. The urgency of the decision made her feel panic. For 18 years she had lived at a slow pace, where changes happened gradually, in safe increments. The idea of making such a radical change in a matter of hours terrified her. It's too fast, she murmured. Too sudden. How can I leave everything behind like this from 1 hour to the next? Ethan breathed deeply, trying to contain his own anxiety. He knew that pressuring her would be counterproductive, but also felt that this was one of those decisions that would define the rest of their lives. I'll make a proposal, he said carefully. Come with me for a week, just 1 week. See my life in New York, see how you feel there. If you don't like it, if you don't feel comfortable, I'll bring you back and commit to spending at least half my time here with you. Isabella studied him for a long moment. And your empire, your business? Can be managed from anywhere. I have competent executives, technology that allows me to work remotely. The only thing really important to me now is you. The declaration touched her deeply, but also increased her anxiety. Ethan, you're making promises based on emotions. What if, after a few weeks or months, you realize you sacrificed your professional life for a romantic fantasy? What if you regret it? What if you stop asking hypothetical questions and trust me? He replied, a touch of frustration finally leaking into his voice. Isabella, I spent 18 years building an empire because I thought that's what would make me happy. Now I've discovered that the only thing that really makes me happy is here, in this kitchen, afraid to take a step toward happiness because it might mean leaving behind a life that, frankly, isn't any life at all. The comment hit her like a slap. How dare you judge my life? It may not be glamorous or exciting like yours, but it's my life. I built every piece of it alone, survived every challenge, and got stuck in it like a bird in a cage that learned to call home, he interrupted. Isabella, you're not living, you're existing, surviving, but not living. When was the last time you felt truly happy? When was the last time you woke up eager for what the day might bring? The question silenced her because she couldn't remember an answer. In the last 18 years, her days had followed a comfortable but lackluster routine. Wake up, draw, take care of the house, go to sleep. Safety but not happiness, survival but not life. 1 week, she said finally, her voice so low he almost didn't hear it. Just 1 week, but if I want to come back, you come back, he promised immediately. No questions, no pressure, no guilt trips. 1 week to get to know my life and decide if there's space in it for you. Isabella nodded slowly, then looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the last time. I'll need to pack some things and find someone to take care of the plants, cancel appointments. I'll help you, Ethan offered, relieved but trying not to show too much excitement so as not to frighten her again. As she climbed the stairs to pack a suitcase, Ethan remained in the kitchen, looking through the window at the garden she loved so much. Was he asking too much of her, forcing her to leave the only place where she felt safe? Or was he finally offering her the chance to discover who she could be if she wasn't defined only by her past wounds? Only a week would tell if they were building a future together, or if they were about to discover that some chasms are too great to be crossed, even by the truest love. New York received Isabella like a fierce animal that evaluated her in silence, deciding if she was predator or prey. The flight had been her first aerial experience, and she had spent the 90 minutes clutching Ethan's hand, alternating between fascination with the view of the clouds and absolute terror at each turbulence. His apartment in the village left her speechless. 3 floors of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the city, minimalist decoration that cost more than she earned in a decade, and a silence that seemed artificial after a lifetime of hearing the sounds of the sea. "It's very clean," she commented, hesitantly touching the marble surface of the kitchen counter. Ethan laughed, but noticed the insecurity behind the comment. The decorator said it was elegant and functional. Now I realize it's just cold and impersonal. In the first few days, Isabella moved through the apartment like a ghost, touching things carefully, as if she might accidentally break some expensive piece. Ethan tried to include her in his routine. He took her to the office to meet his team, to sophisticated restaurants where she was paralyzed in front of menus in French, to social events where she smiled politely but clearly felt like an imposter. "She's charming," commented Mariah, his business partner, after a dinner where Isabella had spoken little and smiled a lot. "But she seems lost, as if she's not sure why she's here." Ethan knew that Mariah was right, but didn't know how to help Isabella find herself in a world that was completely foreign to her. Each attempt to include her in his social life seemed to only highlight more how much they had become different people during the years of separation. The turning point happened on the 4th day, when Ethan had to leave for an emergency meeting and left Isabella alone in the apartment. When he returned, he found her in the living room with several sheets of paper spread across the floor, drawing furiously. "What are you doing?" he asked, intrigued. "Trying to understand this city," she replied, without raising her eyes from the drawing. "In the last few days I've felt as if I was trying to fit into a puzzle where all the pieces are the wrong size. So I decided to stop trying to fit in and start observing." The drawings were extraordinary. Isabella had captured the essence of New York in a way he had never seen, not the obvious tourist spots or the imposing architecture, but the human details. The sandwich vendor on the corner with his calloused hands and tired smile, the elegant executive who fed stray cats during her lunch break, the contrast between the opulence of the buildings and the simplicity of the people who inhabited them. "Isabella, this is incredible," Ethan murmured, examining each drawing. "You've captured New York better than any photographer I know." "It's a city of contrasts," she observed, finally looking at him. "Just like you. The impeccable businessman who cooks risotto and cries reading old letters. The luxurious penthouse that doesn't have a single personal photo on the walls." The observation hit him deeply. "You're right. I think I spent so much time building an image of success that I forgot to build a real life." It was that night, as they dined on the balcony with a view of the illuminated city, that they had the conversation that had been inevitable since the moment she stepped on the plane. "I'm not fitting in, am I?" Isabella asked softly, playing with the wine he had chosen. Ethan stopped chewing, studying her expression. "What do you mean?" "Your life. Your world. I can see how people look at me, trying to understand who I am, why I'm here. And I can see you trying to mold me to fit into spaces where I'll never naturally belong. I'm not trying to mold you." "Yes, you are," she interrupted him gently, "and I don't blame you for it. You want this to work as much as I do, but you're trying to turn a small-town artist into a New York socialite. And that's not going to happen, Ethan. It's not who I am." The silence that followed was laden with mutual disappointment and frustrated love. Ethan knew she was right. He had spent the week trying to fit her into his existing life instead of creating a new life that would work for both of them. "So what do we do?" he asked finally. Isabella stood up and walked to the balcony railing, looking at the city pulsing below them. "Remember when we were children and talked about what our life together would be like when we grew up?" "I remember. We would have a beach house with a studio for you and an office for me, 3 children and a mutt that you insisted on calling Beethoven." She smiled, the first time he had seen a genuine smile from her since they arrived in New York. "We were so naive, weren't we? We thought love would be enough to overcome any difference. And isn't it?" The question came out more vulnerable than he intended. Isabella turned to look at him and he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "Love is enough to want to overcome differences, but it's not enough to erase who we fundamentally are." "Isabella, I'm a simple woman, Ethan. I like waking up hearing birds, not traffic. I like knowing the name of the corner store owner and knowing that when he asks how I am, he really wants to know the answer. This life you've built is impressive, but it's not my life." Ethan felt as if he was losing her again, but this time there was no one to blame but the choices they had both made during the years of separation. "And I'm a man who has grown accustomed to the fast pace, to complex challenges, to the adrenaline of closing million-dollar deals," he reluctantly admitted. "I love you more than anything in this world, but when I think about spending the rest of my life in a small town, drawing watercolors on the porch, I feel as if I'm slowly dying." The brutal honesty of the confession left them both in silence. They had finally recognized the truth they had been avoiding, that 18 years had created fundamentally different people, and love alone couldn't fill the chasm between who they had become. "So that's it?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking. "We lost our chance 18 years ago, and now it's too late." Ethan approached her, taking her hands between his. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe we need to stop trying to force each other to fit into lives that weren't made for both of us. What are you suggesting? That we create something new, not your life, not my life, but our life, something that honors who both of us have become without forcing either of us to give up essential parts of our identity." Isabella looked at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "And what would that look like exactly?" Ethan breathed deeply, formulating an idea that had been forming in his mind since he saw her drawings spread across the floor of his apartment. "What if we transformed the Hill property into something special? Not a luxury resort as my father planned, but an art center, a place where artists like you can work and exhibit, where tourists come seeking culture and not just beaches." Isabella's eyes lit up for the first time in the week. "You would do that? You would leave all this behind?" "Not everything. I can. Maintain a base in New York, travel when necessary for important meetings. But my main home would be with you, and you could have your studio, your art, your quiet life, but also a platform to show your talent to the world." It was a risky compromise that would require sacrifices from both. But for the first time since they had reunited, it seemed like a plan that could actually work. "1 week hasn't ended yet," Isabella observed, but there was a new gleam in her eyes. "No, we still have 3 days," Ethan agreed. "How about we spend those days not trying to make you fit into my life, but imagining what it would be like to build a completely new life together?" 2 years later, Isabella woke up to the familiar sound of waves breaking on the shore and the scent of jasmine invading the bedroom through the open window. Beside her, Ethan slept deeply, a protective arm around her waist, his hair disheveled in a way that made her smile whenever she saw him like this, vulnerable and at peace. The art center they had built together on the old Hill property had become more successful than either of them had imagined. Artists from all over the country came for creative residencies, cultural tourists discovered local talents, and Isabella had finally found her artistic voice, no longer the timid illustrations of before, but powerful works that spoke of overcoming, of healing, of loves that survived the fiercest storms. The main gallery displayed her latest series of paintings, Letters Never Sent, inspired by her own healing journey. Each canvas told the story of a woman learning to trust again, to open herself to love after trauma, to transform pain into beauty. The works had caught the attention of collectors from New York and Miami, and an international art magazine had commissioned a profile on the emerging artist who transforms personal wounds into universal art. Ethan had fulfilled his promise to restructure his life. He maintained an office in New York, but spent most of his time in the coastal town, managing his business remotely and discovering an unexpected satisfaction in projects that had cultural impact beyond financial profit. He had invested in the restoration of the town's historic center, created a scholarship program for young local artists, and even learned to fish, a skill he used mainly as an excuse to spend entire mornings contemplating the sea alongside Isabella. The house where they lived was a perfect hybrid of their personalities. The old Fox family house, completely renovated, but maintaining its colonial charm, with a modern annex that housed a professional studio for Isabella and a sophisticated office for Ethan. The garden she had tended alone for so many years now flourished with plants they had chosen together, creating a private sanctuary where they could simply be themselves. Isabella carefully got up, trying not to wake Ethan, and walked to the window. Down below, in the garden, she could see the centennial tree where everything had begun more than 20 years ago. Under its roots now rested a new box, not of secrets and pain, but of promises for the future. Love letters they wrote to each other, photos of happy moments, plans to expand the art center, and a small baby shoe they had bought the previous week. The pregnancy had been a sweet and terrifying surprise. At 32, Isabella carried not only the joy of finally being able to give life to a child with the man she loved, but also the weight of memories of the lost pregnancy in adolescence. The first months had been filled with anxiety, constant medical consultations, and nocturnal fears that only calmed in Ethan's arms. But now, at 5 months, with her little belly beginning to show and the first kicks making themselves felt, she had finally allowed joy to overcome fear. The baby, a girl as they had discovered the week before, would be called Helena, the name that Isabella had chosen so long ago and that now could finally be used. "Good morning, my love," Ethan's husky voice made her turn. He was sitting on the bed, observing her with that look of adoration that still made her blush after 2 years together. "Good morning," she replied, walking back to the bed. "Helena is moving a lot today. I think she inherited your restlessness," Ethan laughed, pulling her back into his arms and resting his hand on her rounded belly. "Or your creativity. Maybe she's already planning her first works of art." They had married 6 months before, in a simple ceremony on the beach, with only close friends and some of Ethan's family members present. Isabella had worn a simple white dress that she had modified herself, and Ethan cried when he saw her walking toward him on the sand. There was no pomp or ostentation, just two people who had found their way back to each other, promising not to separate again. The honeymoon had been spent at home, exploring every corner of their new life together. They had made love for the first time on their wedding night, a tender and reverent encounter that definitively erased the ghosts of Isabella's past. Ethan had been patient as always, letting her control the pace, celebrating each small victory over her own fears. "I received an interesting proposal yesterday," Ethan said, playing with her hair. "A group of investors wants to create a similar project to ours in the Keys. They want me to coordinate the development." Isabella moved slightly away to look at him. "And do you want to accept?" "Only if you come with me. It would be temporary, a few months to establish the initial structure, but it would be an incredible opportunity to replicate our model in other places." The idea both excited and frightened her at the same time. 2 years ago, the suggestion of leaving her hometown for a few months would have terrified her. Now, with Ethan by her side and the confidence she had developed in herself, it seemed like a possible adventure. "After the baby is born," she said finally, "I want Helena to come into the world here, in the place where our story began. But after that, yes, I think we can create something beautiful in the Keys too." Ethan kissed her softly, a kiss that carried gratitude and promises for the future. "You know I love you beyond reason, don't you?" "I know," she replied, nestling against his chest. "And you know You made me discover I was capable of loving. Without fear, don't you? They stayed like this until the sun rose completely, talking about plans for the art center, alternative names for Helena, and what it would be like to teach a daughter to be strong and courageous in a world that wasn't always kind to independent women. Later, as they had coffee on the porch, the same porch where Isabella had spent so many years drawing alone, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was from Mary Sanders, one of the women whom Ethan's investigator had managed to locate among Benjamin Bennett's victims. "Dear Ethan and Isabella," the letter said, "I cannot adequately express my gratitude for having found me and offered me the opportunity to tell my story. The reparation money allowed me to start my own business, but more important than that was discovering I wasn't alone, that other women had gone through the same as I did. The support group you helped form changed my life. I attach a photo of me with my daughter. She's graduating in law next year and intends to specialize in defending abuse victims. You haven't only healed your own wounds, but helped heal ours too." Isabella wiped the tears streaming down her face as Ethan held her, free hand. The work of locating and supporting his father's other victims had been painful but necessary. 3 of the 5 women had been found, all survivors, all building meaningful lives despite the traumas of the past. "I think that's what our love was destined to do," Isabella said softly. "Not just heal ourselves, but use our healing to help others too." Ethan nodded, kissing her hand. "Your strength inspires me every day, Isabella. The way you transformed the deepest pain into compassion for others, how you used your art to speak about difficult topics, you've become exactly the extraordinary woman I always knew you could be." "We've become," she corrected, "the man you are today, present, attentive, using your wealth and influence to do good, is very different from the ruthless businessman who returned here 2 years ago." As the day progressed, they worked side by side. He in his office, coordinating virtual meetings and reviewing contracts, she in her studio, giving the finishing touches to a painting that portrayed a pregnant woman looking at the sea, one hand on her belly, the other extended toward the infinite horizon. At sunset they walked hand in hand to the hill where everything had begun and ended and begun again. The centennial tree was more majestic than ever, its deep roots a symbol of the solid foundation they had built together. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it," Isabella murmured, leaning against the trunk of the tree. "After so much pain, so much lost time, so much fear, we managed to find our way back to each other." Ethan embraced her from behind, his hands resting on her belly where Helena grew strong and healthy. "Maybe we needed to get lost to learn to value each other. Maybe we needed to grow apart to be able to consciously choose each other as adults." "Do you think she'll forgive us?" Isabella asked, referring to the daughter they lost so long ago. "For being happy, for having found peace." "I think she gave us her blessing," Ethan replied, pointing to a butterfly that had delicately landed on a nearby branch, a butterfly with blue and golden wings that seemed to shine in the late afternoon light. "I think she always knew that one day we would return here together, ready to create the family we always dreamed of having." As the sun set over the sea, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan and Isabella remained embraced under their tree, feeling Helena's gentle movements and planning the future they could finally build together. They had survived separation, trauma, fears, and differences. Now finally they could simply love, deeply, completely, without reservations. Their love had been tested by time, purified by pain, and strengthened by the conscious choice to fight for each other every day.